Okay, in this video module, what we're going to do is take a look at texture alignment on our brushes. I mean, you know, when we bring a texture in and we apply it to a brush's face, it may not always be the size that we want it to be. We may want it to be scaled up a little larger, horizontally or vertically. It may not always tile the way we want it to tile. We may want the texture to repeat itself 2 or 3 times in one direction or another. So there's several different things we can do, as well as also adjust the placement of it. Maybe we want to bump the texture to the left or bump it to the right. And for pulling these things off, we're going to look at the Surface Inspector. Surface Inspector is filled with all sorts of features that help us align our textures. After taking a look at the Surface Inspector, we're then going to talk about various hotkeys that are available for bumping textures, or nudging textures, if you will, on a brush's face, as well as copying and pasting textures. So with that, Logan?
Okay. Well, the very first thing I want to do is apply a certain texture to this one face just to make it a little bit easier to see what we're doing. I'll select that face by Control-Shift left-clicking on it. Then I'll go to Media, and under Textures, let me scroll down. I'm under the Base Wall folder at the moment. So let me just scroll around a little bit and find A_LF_Wall5. There's 5_D01. That should work. So with that now, I can go ahead and start taking a look at the Surface Inspector itself, which can be brought up by hitting the S key. So I'll hit S, and
let's get focus back up on the cam view.
Right, because you notice what happened is shifted down here to the first texture that had S under it. As a matter of fact, I could go fix it real quick by putting the LF wall back on it. LF wall, go to LF wall 5 and grab, wow, let's go way down there, A_LF wall 5. So if I have focus back up on my cam view and I hit S, that'll bring up the Surface Inspector. In the Surface Inspector, we have information and tools available for working with textures. First is it shows what the current texture on that surface is. Then below that, we start with some of the first tools.
Now that material where it's showing the name of the material that's currently assigned to that brush's face that's selected, we can't set anything from there. It's informational purposes only, right?
That's right.
Okay.
So after that, we have Shift horizontally and Shift vertically. What these will do is take the increment you have set here and actually move the texture by that given increment, where 1 is basically a tile of the entire texture, and then fractions of that are just smaller amounts. So you have 0.5 to shift the texture half of its overall dimension. So you could lower that way down to maybe 0.2. Then as you move it, you get smaller increments. So that works the same for Shift horizontally, Shift vertically. After that, we have Rotate, which will rotate the texture with the given degrees. So 15 degrees, or 15 degrees back in the other direction, or so on. After Rotate, we have Texture Scaling, which can work in increments, basically applying an incremental scale or specifying an absolute scale for the surface. So, for example, I could scale the surface horizontally by 2 and hit Enter to actually apply it. And this has basically taking the texture and made it tile twice as much, taking its current horizontal scale and increasing it by 2. So basically the texture appears twice as much horizontally. And since it's incremental, in order to put it back to 1, I'd have to apply 0.5, which effectively takes it back down to 1, then 0.5 again. So with setting nothing else, I can keep hitting Enter over and over again. So now I'm starting to stretch it, Enter, stretch it some more, and so on.
So if you were to put 2 back in there and hit the Enter key about 4 times, do it one more. Okay, there you go. That way you can see the tiling really well.
Okay, so now what we're going to do is take a look at applying an absolute scale. If I wanted to quickly get this back to 1 and I didn't remember how much I had applied, I could always hit absolute, then hit 1 and hit Enter, and there, that forces it back to 1. And after that, hitting it over and over again doesn't keep changing it. So even if I did 0.5, stretched it out some, well, it's stretched, and then that's just because I'm just setting it to 0.5 is applying 0.5 over and over again. So let me set that back to about 1. So that's pretty much all you need to know for basic texture scaling. After that, we have another set of texturing tools, the first of which is Fit. And Fit takes in a width and a height. What Fit does is take the current texture and stretch it out to fit the face that it's applied to. If both of these are left to 1, it takes the texture and fits it exactly once with no tiling. So if I hit Fit, then it gets kind of stretched out to apply to that face. If I give it a width of 2 and hit Fit, it fits a lot better because that way the square texture applied to the rectangular face simply tiles properly instead of stretching.
So it's tiling twice now.
That's right. So after fit, we have cap, which is more used when working with curved surfaces. Basically, it'll let you take a texture that's currently following the surface and straighten it out instead. So you have a more XY alignment instead of following a curved surface. After that, we have natural, which helps a lot when you have you've just created a curved surface and the texture tiles a lot in one axis, and instead you want it to basically smoothly apply. You can use natural. Though back into the general tools, we have flip X and flip Y, which simply flip the texture along a given axis. And really that wraps up the tools in the Surface Inspector itself.
Yeah, the set by patch at the bottom there, that's for modeling, for dealing with patches.
That's right. So now what we're going to do is take a look at some other tools and shortcuts that can be useful.
Hotkeys.
The first hotkey that I want to show is Shift and then using the arrow keys. What this will allow you to do is nudge a texture. So holding Shift and hitting up, or holding up, there I can move, and then left and right. I can basically nudge the texture around.
It gives you some really fine control over surface or texture placement.
That's right. Now, if you want a full list of available texturing shortcuts like that, those can be found under the command list. So if I scroll down, we have text, and there's the text shift up, down, left, and right that I was using just a second ago, as well as a few others for rotate and scale. So now what we want to take a look at is workflow enhancement for once you have several brushes already in the level with textures, how you can select textures off of an existing brush and apply them to other brushes. If I switch over to the Textures tab, you can see I have this texture currently selected. The first shortcut in this case would be middle click. When you middle click on a surface, you select that texture, and you can see in the textures window it actually gets selected. So as I click the ceiling, the wall, the floor.
And also, since we have that brush's face selected on the wall, of course the texture is going to be assigned to it as well.
Right, just as though I had actually been clicking it in the texture window.
Right.
So let me go and apply the original texture back to it. Deselect it. Now, how is this useful? Well, with that texture selected, not only does it select it down in the window, it actually copies the surface properties, which you may or may not use later, depending on if you want to or not. So with this selected now, we have a shortcut that will allow us to apply the selected texture to some other face. So let's say I grab the floor texture, and I want to apply it to this wall. I can hold Shift and middle click on the wall, and it will apply the texture.
Of course, you'll notice that all the alignment information is not there.
Right. Simply doing a Shift middle click will paste the texture but keep the surface's current alignment. If I was to Control Shift click, it'll actually take the alignment that it had copied and apply that to the face I just clicked on. So if I was to say I want to put it back to the wall texture now. So if I click on the wall texture and then just Shift click, I still have the alignment I set on it. I have to Control Shift to paste the alignment from this wall to here. Now, where this can really get useful is when, say you had just been working with all these floor textures. So let me select all three floor textures. So grab all three of them, and then in the Surface Inspector, say I had fit them to a width of 8 and 8, trying to get these aligned properly. So I fit. It looks pretty good on the one floor, but you'll notice the smaller brush in the hallway also applied an 8 to 8 alignment over itself because it's a smaller brush. But now what I really want to do is have all the floor look like it's one full piece. So to do that, I can middle click on the one floor, copying the texture and the properties, and then Control Shift, so I paste the aligner from this guy onto that one, and it lines up. So at a glance it looks good, but if I go up to the next room, you can see it kind of misaligns a little bit more. So I can Control Shift again and paste the original alignment to both surfaces. And now I have all three, basically all three faces are aligned and using the same texture properties.
Right, and it's not really like using the middle mouse button. It's not really like copying the texture. It's more like selecting the texture and copying the alignment properties from that particular selected brush face.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, and so with that, that's really going to wrap up this lesson. It's going to give you guys enough to get out there and start aligning your textures on your brushes.